Hi everyone, it's me again. Hi everyone, it's Rita. I'm part of XKids, and as you know, I'm always super excited to see you on the other side of our screens. But we're here today for one more of our live streams, and because this one is extra special because we have not only one speaker but two speakers. So you need to hang in there because it will be for sure a cool one. But we'll get there in a second. So first of all, if you're new here, welcome, and we're super happy to see you here in our YouTube channel at XKids. We have some content from previous talks, not only on YouTube, but also on other channels. So if you want to check those out, feel free to do so. So if this is not your first time in our streams, or if you're watching the recording, it's awesome to see you here. And we hope this will be one more exciting live stream for you. So as a reminder, if you don't recall what X6 is about or what we do, let's talk about it very shortly. So X6 is an engineering company focused on providing capacity to product companies. We're not the typical project company due to several reasons, and that could actually be a talk just by itself. And I know I always say this, but one day we'll have one talk just about that. But we have a huge focus on community, a strong engineering culture, and a product drive. X6 represents the perfect balance, at least as we see it, between projects and products, and our teams across Portugal work in building products while dealing with the broad stack. So if you want to know more about what we do, our content, open positions, our team, and more, you can make sure to follow us not only here on YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitter, even on Instagram and Medium. We have some cool content and stuff over there. So I think it will be for sure a nice and interesting search of yours. But regarding today and why we're here talking, so we have not only one speaker, but two speakers, as I mentioned before. So we have Maurício and Martin as our speakers of the day, and they will introduce us to Andy. So if you want to meet Andy, just hang in there. There will be space for questions at the end, so you can make sure to add them in the chat, both on Twitter and YouTube as well. But before anything else, let's bring our world-class speakers to the stage. Hi, Martin. Hi, Maurício. It's nice to have you here.
Hello.
Hello.
So I think let's get the show on the road. If you agree, I'll start by sharing Mauricio's screen. And again, before we start, there will be space for questions. So just make sure to leave them in the comment section and we'll address them at the end. Okay, let's go then.
Hello. Folks, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm super excited to talk about Andy because this is in fact the first time we present this publicly. We have been developing this for the past 9 months, maybe a year or so, and we're experimenting this at TU Delft, the university I teach. And I think, or we think, that the tool is now at the point that others can use. So if you're teaching software testing, maybe this tool can help you. As I said, my name is Maurício. I actually work for Adyen, the payment company. I lead the tech academy there. I'm also an assistant professor at TU Delft, the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands, and where I teach software testing. And today I have my TU Delft hat here because this was all work done in the university. So let's get started. So let me give some motivation for this, right? So teaching software testing is fundamental. We all know as a developer, you have to write tests. So it's not something, theoretical anymore. We actually write this all the time. But the point is that not a lot of universities actually teach it. There are papers that review the course contents of different universities, and they show that in a lot of places, testing is just 1 or 2 lectures inside of this software engineering course. Delft took the other way around. So we actually have a dedicated testing course, and we give this to first-year students. So in quarter number 4, so more to the end of the first year, they have an entire course on software testing. And one cool thing of TU Delft is that we like students, and we like them so much that we have more than 500 students every year, which means we need some tooling to help us educate all these people. But when it comes to testing education, you don't see a lot of stuff out there. When it comes to introduction to programming, you do see tools, but tools for testing, not so much, right? And I think part of the challenge is that this type of tools they have to solve is how do you make sure that the student wrote the right tests, because you want to give feedback to the students saying, maybe you missed this test, maybe you missed that other test. So this was kind of the challenge that we had and the big motivation for us to develop ND. So as I said, and let me start from sharing the repository with you. So if you go to GitHub, CSC 1110, which is the course of our code here, /Andy, you are going to find the tool. The tool has a beautiful README page that you can use. I guess this link is going to appear in the chat as soon as possible. So again, let's start from the end and let me present the Andy as a whole from the very beginning. So how does this work? We have the student here. I hope you can see my mouse pointer. So you have the student. The student works on an assignment that we created beforehand, and think of this assignment as a Java class or a Java method, whatever that we want this person to test. This person writes test codes, let's say in their own IDE, or as we're going to show in the embedded IDE we have at our university. And as soon as the person is kind of confident with the solution, she then submits to Andy. So what does Andy do? And here I'm going to be a little bit technical because I think it's nice for you to also understand how the tool works behind the scenes. So Andy gets the code of the test, Andy compiles everything because this is just pure Java code. It has to become bytecode at some point. We then run all the tests. Meanwhile, we instrument the code and of course measure coverage. We run mutation tests that just gives us a different and stronger criteria to see if the test suite misses something. Then we run meta tests, which are tests written by the teacher looking for specific test cases. You're going to see very soon what it looks like. And then finally, some static analysis, because we also felt the need to answer questions like, are you mocking this class, right? Because if you're using mock, we want to kind of see if the person is mocking the right stuff. Andy then gets all this information, it puts together on a formula, it then gives a grade to the person, as well as, if you want to, I'm going to also show that Andy has different modes of execution, and if Andy is in this full hint mode, Andy will say, you know, you're missing these test cases. Yeah. So this is kind of how the tool works in a gist. And of course, I didn't say the word rubric, so I'm going to mention this. As a teacher, you not only give to the student the assignment, but you also have to give to Andy a rubric. And this rubric basically contains how to assess the code. So for example, what meta tests are you looking for? What type of static analysis you want to run, so on and so forth. Yeah. But for the student, this is actually hidden. The student doesn't see this. This is more just for Andy. Yeah. Cool. Then let me give you an example of an exercise we have in our suite. Something we try to do is to also give them a lot of problems, classes, methods from real-world open source systems. So this one I'm going to illustrate is the concatenate method you see in the Apache Commons library. And then we kind of give to the students the description of the method. This actually comes directly from Apache. So the concatenate method concatenates a sequence of arrays. The return array consists of entries of input arrays concatenated in the order they appear, blah, blah, blah. So the student reads the documentation. The student has also access to the source code of the method she needs to test. And in this case, you can see the implementation here. This one is a bit small, 10, 15 lines of code, a bunch of loops. No if statements in this case, but still quite challenging for you to think of all the corner cases. So this is what the person sees, and then the person starts to write tests, right? Together with the assignment, the teacher also needs to provide the rubrics, as I said, and this is basically what the rubric looks like. It's also a Java class that you provide to Andy, and it has many methods that you need to override. And one of them is called weights. And in this one, you kind of define how much each component weights in the whole final grade calculation. So for example, we were saying that coverage is 15% of the assignment, mutation is 45, meta tests are 40%, and there are no code checks or static analysis. This is then 0. Remember that we're doing this in the context of an university, so we want to give a grade at the end for the user or for the student. You have to say which classes are the ones under test, and then you kind of provide the full name of the class here. So it's met arrays, right? It matches the name of the class here. And then a list of meta tests. And how do those meta tests work? Think of getting the production code, so the math arrays class. And then we do small mutations on purpose. right? And we break the code on purpose. And why do we do this? Because if the test suite that the student provided is good enough, then there will be a failing test, right? The test will fail because we just introduced a bug. So this gives the teacher the possibility of, if you want the student to validate this if, maybe you can just remove this if from the code and see if there's a test failing or something, right? So you can play with this in many different ways. So in here, what we're doing is we have this insert add, so we are inserting at line 23 of the file, we're inserting this if statement. So if length is equal to 0, then we throw an exception. And that means, if the student code has a test case where the length of the array x is 0, so the person is trying this corner case, right, an empty array, then it's going to throw an exception. There will be a red test, a failing test, and then this counts as good. Your test suite fails on this. And then as a teacher, you can just keep doing this, building your own meta tests. We have different functions for this. So this one is insert at, which is just put a line somewhere in the code. We have string replacement, which gets a string that is in the source code already and just replace for something else. So in here you can see this was x position 1 dot length. We replaced it by x position 0 of the array dot length, right? Introducing small bugs on purpose. So, and as you can see, this meta test class is just an utils class from our side that enables teachers to write all sorts of different mutants meta tests in the production code. Yeah. Maybe I didn't mention this, but I should. So we're using standard Java tooling here. So we use Jacoco for code coverage. We use PyTests for mutation testing, and static analysis is a framework that comes from us. You're going to see it. Then maybe one more example for you to understand how we use static analysis. This is the release editions class, and this one is not super complicated from in terms of ifs and fors and etc. It resembles more like business type of code where you have dependencies and you inject those dependencies and then something happens and probably some data comes from databases. Maybe this book service goes to a database to retrieve the books, and then, yeah, something happens. So in this case, we want the student to mock and show that she can use mocks. And that's what we assess also. And we can do this by means of also this set of classes we provide to the teacher. So they can check things like, the email service class is mocked, right? And the business implementation class should not be mocked. And we don't want people to use spies, just mocks, right? And retrieve books, which is a method, should not be verified. So there shouldn't be a mockito.verify in this method. Add book, on the other hand, should be verified. So we have lots of those small static analysis tools that help you to do all these type of assertions. And then, of course, you can combine those with meta tests and code coverage and mutation testing from PyTest. All of this will be calculated as well. So in this exercise in particular, we make sure that the person is covering everything here. That's not super hard. That's possible. Kind of easy because you just have one if statement, but you can also do these mocking checks as well. Right, something else you can try to validate here. Let's see if we do this. Not in this one, but for example, there's a loop here. Maybe you want to try what happens if all books returns empty or something, right? That could be a nice corner case for you to exercise that you can express as a meta test. So what I'm trying to say by showing lots of examples is that Andy is a super flexible tool for teachers, right? You can assess the code of the student from many different perspectives. And that is the beauty of it, right? Because you can create your own exercise, and Andy will probably give you all the tools you need to assess it in an automated fashion. In my case, that's beautiful because I don't want to keep giving feedback to 500 students times 50 exercises they do over the quarter or something. That doesn't scale. Just to give you a quick list of all the code checks we have implemented, you can have things like that all the test methods have assertions. Maybe you want to check if the person wrote a loop in the test method, and you can negate these. So they're saying We don't want loops in the test methods because that might be a smell or something. You can see if the person is using string literals in the test, right? And as you can imagine, all those things started to emerge once we saw solutions from students. And then we thought, well, we can make our rubrics a little bit better by adding these code checks. We have lots of code checks for Mockito, lots well for, and we have some code checks for JQuick, which is a framework for property-based testing, which is a topic we also teach in the course. If you don't know what property-based testing is, that's something nice for you to Google later. It's a different way of writing tests. And JQuick is a framework for that. And if you have exercises on it, you can also do some checks using ND. Behind the scenes, this uses Eclipse JDT as parser. And if you want to extend and create your own code check, that's super easy. All you need to do is to extend some of our classes there, and then your new code check will simply be easily then plugged into our pipeline. I said about modes of execution. That is another functionality that Andy provides, because we see Andy as a tool for both formative and summative assessment. By formative assessment, I mean the student is practicing. So this is not exam time, right? It's practice time. So the student wants to just practice. And there, if you're practicing, maybe you want to just run the tool and kind of see the final grade. Like, you know, you're getting an 8 out of 10, but you don't want to know what you're missing, because maybe you want to go back to the exercise and reflect and try to find what you missed. But maybe that exercise is too hard for you, you cannot find the solution. Then you can say, Andy, please show me what I'm really forgetting. And then Andy shows the full report and say, you forgot this test here, right? So that's super nice for before the exam. But we also want to use this in the exams, because we feel it's super nice that if you practice these type of exercises during the lecture, then you should do the same in the exam. So Andy has this exam mode, which is basically, if you run, Andy will just return code coverage and mutation testing for you, but it doesn't return a grade, and it doesn't return you hints on specific mistakes you're making. Why does it return always coverage and PyTest? Because those are things developers have on their IDEs, right? It makes no sense to hide those. So Andy, to facilitate the lives of the students during the exam, which is a stressful moment, you don't have to remember of running Jacoco or running PyTest. Everything is in a box for you. And then Andy just says you have 80% coverage here, right? Maybe you want to go more. And finally, we have the grading mode, which is what we run after the student submits the solution and the student is done with the exam. So the time is over. Now it's time for the teacher to grade. And Andy, in exam mode, produces a final grade together with a big assessment of everything Andy looked in the exercise and etc. Yeah. So I said a lot about how Andy works. So maybe you can see this in practice, and that is the time where Martin will show us. Martin, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Maurício. So what you see on my screen now is WebLab, which is a platform developed by TU Delft, which allows students to write code and execute it. So Andy is designed to work with WebLab. So this is what a student can, what students sees on WebLab when they open a practice assignment. Over here, they see a solution template, which they can edit. Over here, they can see the assignment description. And here in the library tab, they can see the method that they are supposed to test. And on the right, they can run their tests. So right now I have prepared the test suite for this method here. This method is sorted, checks if the array that's passed to it is sorted. If it is sorted, it returns true. If it is not sorted, it returns false. And a student, this assignment in this assignment, the student has to test this method. So let's now enter this test suite here. And let's run Andy to see what Andy thinks about this test suite. So first of all, the run tests button would only run the tests and see if those tests pass against this code here. Run with coverage would run Jacoco and PyTest, which shows branch coverage and mutation coverage. And the assess button and the assess with hints button would actually run meta tests and provide an actual grade. So let's click on the assess button to see what Andy thinks about this code. So right now it's running the tests. It's creating mutants. It's running these tests against the meta tests that we have prepared. And here we see Andy's output. We see that all of our tests pass against this code. We see that we have great branch coverage, 8 out of 8. We have very good mutation coverage. There are no code checks on this assignment, but we see that we're missing one of the meta tests. So right now the student has to figure out what meta test they're missing. And as Maurício mentioned, meta tests are bugs that we have intentionally introduced in this code. And we see if the student's test suite can actually catch those bugs. So this test suite does not catch one of those bugs. So the student now has to figure out what edge case there could be that they're missing. If the student cannot figure out what edge case they are missing, they can always click on the Assess with Hints button, which is going to show them some hints. So the Assess with Hints button does the same thing as the Assess button, but it will also show some additional information which can help the student in their exam preparation. So right now we can see what meta tests we are passing and what meta tests we are failing. Right now we see that we pass all meta tests, but for one. We see that we don't actually pass the meta test where the array is empty. So this meta test introduces a bug in this method where this method does not work correctly if the array that is passed to it is empty. So let's add a test for that. And let's see if that will fix the problem. Right now, I'm just creating a very simple test, which we will pass an empty array to the isSorted method. And it's going to check if it returns true. So let's run Andy again and see what Andy can say about that. So right now we see that we passed all 10 meta tests. So Andy is a very useful tool, and it can also do code checks. And code checks, basically, as Maurício mentioned, they check if certain classes are mocked and certain classes are not mocked. For example, here we have code checks that check if the trip repository is mocked and if the trip, which is a value class, is not mocked, because a value class should not be mocked usually. And yes, this is basically what code checks are used for. Static analysis to check how good the tests are. And also, thanks to Andy's very flexible internal architecture, we can very easily port it to different platforms. This is WebLab, which is used by TU Delft and a few more universities. But we have also created a Maven plugin, which can be used by anyone since Andy is open source. So right now, I'm in IntelliJ, and this is this same class from WebLab with the isSorted method. And here are the tests. And right now I'm going to run Andy locally, not on WebLab, to show you how the Maven plugin works. All I have to do is type Maven Andy run, which is going to do the same thing as what we saw on WebLab. But it's going to do all of that locally on my machine. This would allow students to run every single assignment on their own machine without having to use WebLab. And here we see that we get the final grade of 100. Furthermore, Andy also provides test reports, which are basically Jacoco and PyTest reports, which the student can very easily see right here on WebLab without having to run that locally on their machine. Here we see that our tests cover every single line here, and we see that we have very good mutation coverage. And now Maurício is going to tell you more about our assignments.
Thank you so much, Martin. So as you can see, Andy works not only in our own environment, this web lab thing, but also if you don't have access to it, you can just ask your students to clone our repository and then use Andy locally. And we have been creating assignments for a while now. And those assignments are all open in this assignments repository under the same GitHub organization. So I think we have more than 50 plus assignments already available. That's just a guesstimate from my side. And we have 3 types of different assessment exercises. One that is focused on, we give you a Java class full of ifs and fors. And there you have to leverage domain testing and structural testing to create good test suites. Property-based testing, we have a bunch of exercises to exercise this type of testing as well. And finally, stubs, fakes, and mocks, so that you can also exercise those. Yeah, and every year when we create new assignments for the exam, once the exam is over, we add to this repository. So this code base of exercise will just keep growing, right? So as a teacher, let me rephrase this. As a teacher, if you want to use this, you can just ask your students to clone this repo. All they have to do is, maybe I can actually show how this works. So if they clone this repo, then in each folder, you have the type of exercise as I mentioned, and then a list of exercises. And then each one of these, they are independent Java projects. So your student can just open these in IntelliJ, let's say, and then the POM file is configured. You don't have to do anything. The student can just start writing tests. And if the person types Maven Andy run, as Martin showed, Andy will run and it will do the calculation for you. Yeah, of course, as a teacher, if you also want to use these to grade exams, right? Maybe you want to plug these into your lab where you have a lot of computers. That's also possible. All you need to do in the end, you get the solutions from the students, and then you just run Andy locally in your computer in grading mode for all the students, right? Martin mentioned that other universities use WebLab. So if you want to use WebLab, and that's a good, that's our recommendation, by the way, because that removes all the hassle of you asking, of you having to ask your students to clone repositories and deal with local issues, right? We all know if you have 500 students, everything that can happen will happen in terms of problems. WebLab removes this barrier. People just open their browser and they start writing tests. You can do that. All you need to do is to email me. Of course, the university charges a small fee just to make the machines to run, but it's usually much cheaper than if you decide to set this up yourself. But if you want, it's all available there as well. Now, 2 more things I want to talk into this presentation, or maybe 3: the challenges we faced, where we are going now with the tool, and what is the testing philosophy behind all this. Yeah. First, the challenges. So I think, let me see how my slides are working. Yeah, perfect. So make it performatic was super hard. As you saw, Martin clicks in a button. In 10 seconds, Andy compiles the code, runs code coverage, runs PyTests. Then for each meta test, it changes the code, it recompiles it, and it runs the tests again, right? And all of this happens in 10 seconds. Our first version would take like a minute, right? The first version was a super naive implementation where we would just get the code of the students, put it inside of a predefined Maven project, we would then just run, Maven test coverage by test, static analysis, etc. Get the results, reports generated by those tools, parse them, and then present as the output. That would take like a minute. That didn't work, right? Imagine the student clicking, assess, and having to wait 1 minute for the result. That made no sense to us. How did we solve this? Andy makes native calls to all the frameworks. So Andy calls the JUnit API to run the tests. Andy uses the jacocal API to instrument the code. It gets the data structure with the results back from jacocal, and then it parses it. And the same for PyTests. And that's how we got 10 seconds. 10 seconds, not perfect. Yeah, maybe, 5 seconds, 2 seconds would be better, but 10 seconds is much better. This will not make the students too pissed, right? And as Martin showed, Andy has simpler versions. So if you just want to run the tests, for example, this is much faster, right? Then Andy replies right away. And that can be super useful if you are in an IDE like WebLab, where you just want to make sure things are passing. You can do that. As a developer, right? You just run the tests sometimes. You can do the same. To make all of that to happen, I think we suffered a lot because all these tools like jacocal and PyTests and JUnit, they all have their own class loaders. PyTest shadows a lot of libraries. So to make all of this to happen together, and of course we also changed the class loader ourselves, right? Because we compile the code and then we have to do some stuff. So there's a lot of class loading magic happening, and it was super hard for us to make sure all of those things could work together. We spent a good hours debugging stuff and trying to understand how to make this happen. But we did, not a problem anymore. This is done. Maybe one limitation, PyTest shadows JUnit. So and the simple solution to solve this is that we're kind of bounded by the JUnit version that PyTest uses. That's not a biggie because PyTest updates super fast. And for education purposes, I think that's fine. Creating a DSL for teachers that was not super hard to use was also a challenge, and I think there's still lots of improvement to be done there. The first version of the configuration file that I showed you was just a text file where we would say key equals value, and then a bunch of meta tests that we would then parse this string and make magic. That was super complicated. Lots of small mistakes that you would only get when you run the tool. The new version, which is a Java class, that's much better because if you make a mistake, the IDE will complain to us so we can get these mistakes before. But our static analysis tool and our meta test API, it becomes so flexible that you kind of need to get used to it to become productive. There are just too many options nowadays for this. So I don't think we are at the best right now in terms of the DSL we offer to teachers, but that's definitely okay enough for you to get started. The Maven plugin was also a bit of a challenge to us, and I never thought writing a Maven plugin that would just call this ND tool that we created was a thing. And I coded the first version on a weekend and I said it's done. But then once Maven also lets, it's on magic to the whole soup of magic, class loading magic we're doing. And then it also took us some time to figure this out, how to make it locally. We actually solved it just a few days ago. Right in time for the presentation. So presenting it pressured us to make it happen. That was good. Nice. So ongoing and next steps for us right now. We want to support Selenium tests because we also kind of want to teach students how to write system tests using Selenium. We're almost there. There are challenges. How do you write meta tests for a web application that is kind of a black box thing? So there are lots of questions like this that we still need to find the best way to solve, but we're going to get there. And soon we're going to have Selenium exercises as well. Analytics. As a teacher, I want to see what are the hardest exercises for people, what mutants or meta tests they miss the most, so on and so forth. So we're building this analytics platform that whenever a student submits code, we get the Andy report and we upload it to this analytics server so that we can look at it. I think that's super valuable for teacher. Myself, I can see me looking at this report and then solving the complicated ones in the classroom. There might be, of course, implications in terms of anonymity and etc. So all the data we collect is anonymous. There's no user information data in our analytics server, so we cannot really track users. And it's important to say that this is only happening in the web lab version, so the version we run for TU Delft students. The Maven plugin does not send information to the analytics. What else? Part of our plan is to also try to create a tool to support teachers in creating more assignments. Creating assignments is super hard. We basically go to open source libraries. We look at nice methods that could be tested by a first year student. And that take us some time, and the low hanging fruits, they're almost over and it's not easy to find more. So maybe a smart tool that can crawl open source repositories looking for good assignments is something on my to-do list. Cool. So you could see where this tool is going. And now maybe I should have said this at the very beginning, right? But what is the idea behind giving to students those small methods and etc.? So this is kind of based on the course that I teach in Delft for maybe 5 or 6 years now, which just became a book published by Manning called Effective Software Testing. And my ideal in the course and in the book is not to teach people how to use the frameworks, because there's a lot of material already about this. And if you want to learn JUnit, you can kind of just read the tutorial. The same for Mockito, the same for PyTest, whatever. But the goal of the course is more to teach people how to reason about creating test cases, right? So you look at the documentation or small Java doc, and you look at the methods. How can you systematically identify test cases there, right? So when you look at an if condition, you want to exercise the true branch and the false branch. If there are multiple conditions, maybe you want to exercise the different conditions and achieve what we call condition coverage. So this is what this book is about. And the exercises kind of reflect that, because as soon as they have a small documentation there and a small implementation, they can reason about those techniques that we discuss over the book. And I think, well, if we're teaching software testing, maybe a good combination is the Andy tool we created together with the book. So they kind of go together. You're going to see that if your students read the book, they can solve those exercises and they can reason about these things. The mocking exercise is also because we also have a discussion on mocks, when to mock something, when not to mock something. That's why we created those checks, right? Because we want to make sure that people are mocking what needs to be mocked and not just mocking everything, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the idea behind this whole course of that we teach at Delft, not to teach the tool, but to teach how to create test cases, which, in my opinion, is what really matters. Time to say thank you to a lot of people. The first one is, of course, for the university. All of this is done with the money I got from my fellowship. So TU Delft gives 4 education fellowships a year to teachers at the university that have some innovative projects. I was awarded with this fellowship last year, and I'm burning all that money to build Andy, and I'm super happy with the results. So thanks for the Dutch taxpayer and TU Delft to fund these projects. And a lot of it, or maybe most of it, was implemented by former students of my course, like Martin, which is the lead developer right now. But we also had many working on this: Jan, Paul, Florena, Thijs, Diman, Nadine, Theodore, Jon, Wouter, and of course the entire web lab team, which has nothing to do with Andy per se, but they spend a lot of energy making sure Andy could run on their own platform. It's open source now. I'm looking forward to your PRs. Final thing, yeah, why is it called Andy? You might be asking, right? Andy, we named Andy after Professor Dr. Andy Zeidman. Andy is a professor in software quality at TU Delft. He's also the director of studies. And because that's not enough for him, he also teaches Introduction to Programming to our first year computer science students. And Andy is a super strong proponent of testing, unit testing, you name it. And he thinks this needs to be taught so much that in week number 3, so the person is just learning the basics of ifs and loops, Andy already shows them JUnit. So this was kind of our way to pay a tribute to all the effort that Andy has been doing for more than 10 years now in making sure every student in Delft learns automated software testing. That is it. So links to the tools. If you want to use Andy, you go to Andy's GitHub repository. The README page hopefully is clear enough for you to use it. If you have questions, you want to use it in your course, you can just open an issue. I am monitoring the issues. Martin is monitoring the issues. The assignments, all open source as well. Different repository. Again, just ask your students to fork it. So forking is nice because then we can see the count there and how many people are using it, and you can just use. If you want to talk to me directly via email, that's my email over there. That's my Twitter handle. This presentation is Creative Commons. Feel free to redo it. And if you like the tool, give us a star on GitHub because that gives us energy. That was what we had to say, I think, Martin. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin and Maurício. I think it was a great talk, and we actually have a lot of comments and questions from the audience. So first of all, we have Nadine, which I think is also part of this project, saying that it's really amazing to see Andy running in Web Labs. So I think I can say also on behalf of Maurício and Martin, thank you also, Nadine, for making this happen. You're also a part of this presentation, so it's quite cool to see you here. We also have a question, so if you don't mind, I'll throw it to the stage, which is from Antonius. And Antonius, thank you so much for your question. Did you ever consider making these suggest tests to the user, as in make some guesses about potential bugs that your implementation might have?
Let me think, Antonius, about your question. Making these suggestion tests to the user. I'm not really sure if I follow exactly. Make some guesses about potential bugs that your implementation might have. So, good. Let me see if I can answer your question. If not, you then comment again, okay? For now, students don't write production code. They only write test code. But we indeed consider giving students the possibility of writing production code as well, and then the test code, and then see if they wrote some bug into the implementation as well. I didn't put this as a next step, but that is a good idea. So if that answered your question, let me know. If not, just ask again, yeah?
Thank you for your answer, Maurício, and also thank you, Antonius, for your question. So you just gave an idea to the team, so that's always good. We also have some great feedback from Danielle Faber saying that it was Duke. We also have Maximilian Max, which is...
So just one remark, Rita. Danielle is actually my father-in-law, and Duke is the name of my dog.
Oh, that's cool. I thought it was he was also part of the presentation. I felt it for a couple of seconds over there. That's good. Awesome. It's nice that we have
families here.
Exactly. That's awesome. Thank you. Also, Max, which was our 100th follower and subscriber here on YouTube here in our YouTube channel, he was asking if it's possible to have the Web Lab link, but if I know correctly, this is not possible, right? But everything else is available on GitHub so that Max can explore it, correct?
Indeed, yeah. So we don't have a public page about Web Lab, but if you want to use it as a university, you can email me and we can arrange that.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. And also, Max asked about your book, so you can find a book to Mauricio's, the link to Mauricio's book in the chat. So you already shared that, so you can feel free to do that. So we also have great feedback from Thomas saying that it's an incredible meet tool. So we'll give it a star, and also amazing presentation from Max. And yeah, so thank you so much, everyone. I think it was awesome to have you here. I hope, Maurício and Martin, it was also a good time for you. And I hope we get the chance to see you here in another presentation, even to show us next steps on Andy. We ourselves as XGeeks, we're trying to focus more and more on open source. So I think this is also a great talk for our team internally. And before we finish, we have one last comment from Antonio. So if you don't mind, I'll address it as well, which is, Antonius was wondering if you will be coordinating new features / fixes and what not through GitHub issues. I would be interested in helping out when I get the time.
Nice, yeah. So at the beginning we were using Basecamp, but then once we decided, yeah, this is going to become open source, we then moved to GitHub. So everything happens on GitHub right now.
Okay, awesome. That's nice. So everyone can follow up. That's nice. We also have a comment from Thomas. So awesome, everyone over there at home. There's a lot of interaction. That's what we're up to. Awesome. But Thomas mentioned that good luck with improving the configuration files. That will really take a lot of thoughtful planning. Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah, it will. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Is there any more comments from everyone over there watching us at the moment? We'd love to see that before we finish, of course. In the meantime, while people write their final notes, Martin and Maurício, how did you feel about being in our XGeeks stage? Was it good for you as well?
For me, it was super fun. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing these insights with us, and we're looking forward to see next steps. I think everyone over there at home really enjoyed your presentation. So thank you so much once again, and I'll see everyone for our next live stream next week. And yeah, keep an eye on our social media, but also on Andy's project on GitHub, but also on Mauricio's and Martin's accounts. Okay. Bye, everyone. It was nice to see you. Ciao.